A very good evening to all of you. I welcome you all to the ICANN initiative, the Hindu and Indian Express analysis. We will start the day with the prelims theme of the day. So today's theme is going to be environment. So you will have to first make a list of the critically endangered species of India, which has been listed so by the IUCN. Then you will also have to find information about the various pyramids that we talk about in ecology, whether it's the food pyramid, the energy pyramid, or the pyramid of numbers, and in different types of ecosystems, whether it is the terrestrial ecosystem or the marine ecosystem. You will have to know what are the characteristics of the pyramids in different ecosystems. So this is the prelims theme that you'll have to work upon for today. Now we'll start with the first topic of the day, which is the right to know. So this comes under your GS2 syllabus of the constitutional, the fundamental rights, the constitutional principles and all that. So the recent news associated with this right to know is that the high-level committee was set up in Assam to come out with the explanation for clause 6 of the Assam Accord, that is to implement the clause 6 of Assam Accord, and also to define who the Assamese people are. So this was a work that was given to the high-level committee to recommend how to implement the clause 6 of Assam Accord and to define the Assamese people. The high-level committee had finalized its report way back in February itself, and this was submitted to the Chief Minister of Assam, who then passed it on to the Union Home Minister way back in the month of March itself. But even after that, this particular report was not put in the public domain, was not made public. So now what has happened is the All Assam Students Union, which was also represented in the high-level committee, has now released this report in August recently. Last week it has released this report and it has made it public. So the reason why this has been done, or what the reason that has been cited, is that the central government has not acted upon the report, but people on the other hand have a right to know. So based on this right to know, the All Assam Students Union has now released this report in the public domain because of the failure of the central government to do the same, and the recognition of the fact that people have a right to know. So even in the past, several times this has happened. For instance, the Vora committee released a report in the 1990s which spoke about the unholy nexus between the criminals, the politicians and the bureaucracy. So this report also was kept under the wraps for almost 2 years and it was not put in the public domain. So time and again such incidences have happened where the public has the right to know, but then some of the reports have not been put in the public domain and the public has been kept in the secrecy. Recent examples include the 2015 framework agreement that happened between the government and also the NSE and IM. So that framework agreement was also not put up in the public domain. So similarly, we have seen while we were revising regarding the educational, when we were revising the other day regarding environmental protection. So we saw how the TSR Subramaniam committee report and also the Sailesh Nayak committee report on the coastal zone regulation were also, they were shrouded with opacity and in secrecy, and they were also not again put up in the public domain much. So there have been various instances where the right to know of the people have been undermined. So in this regard, we are going to examine some important Supreme Court cases which you can use in your answers whenever you are writing on the right to know. The first thing is the state of Uttar Pradesh versus the Raj Nareen case that happened in 1975 itself. So in this case, what the judge said was that the people of this country have a right to know every public act. So public act means wherever any transaction takes place and that has a public interest involved. So in such cases, the public is entitled, that means the public has the right to know every single detail of this transaction that is having any public impact or that involves public interest. So therefore, the right to know of the people is definitely there and people are entitled to know everything about such a public transaction. In fact, this particular case said that the right to know originates from this concept of the freedom of speech itself, and the freedom of speech is a fundamental right under our constitution. So it is from here itself that the right to know emanates. So in this regard, the Supreme Court made a mention here that there are some documents which are not made public, but however they don't involve any public security or the national security concept. That is, many times the center government does not publicize a document saying that making it public would endanger the national interest. But there are also so many documents which have nothing to do with national interest, whose publication doesn't jeopardize national interest, but still such documents are not put in the public domain. For example, the cabinet papers. So they may not have anything to do with the national security, but still are not made public. So in this particular case, the Supreme Court said that wherever there are in any case, if making it public does not have any repercussion on the public security, then such documents must be made public because people have the right to know. So this was the observation made by the court in the state of UP versus the Rajnarine case in 1975. The next important case was the SP Gupta versus the President of India case in 1981. So in this particular case, the Justice Venkatramaya, he made an observation. The observation was that the people of India, the citizens of India, have a right to know everything on anything that has an influence or that impacts the public or that involves public interest. The citizens of India have the right to know everything related to it, and not just on the need to know basis. So usually what happens is in many of the official documents, only that portion of the content is made public to the people which the government feels the public should know or the public needs to know. That's all, and the rest portion of the document are usually not made public. So it is called as making it public on a need to know basis. But what the judge observed in this particular case, the SP Gupta case, is it is not just on the need to know basis that the people should be made aware or should the documents must be made public. Rather, the people have this fundamental right to know, and therefore they are entitled to know every detail related to any public transaction, and it should not be just on the need to know basis. Not just on the need to know basis, rather every single detail must be made public. So this is what was the observation in the SP Gupta case. There was another case which happened in 2019, which is the Yashwant Sinha versus the Central Bureau of Investigation case. Here again, what the judge underlined was that the right to know can be curtailed only in certain limited circumstances. If otherwise it should not be curtailed. So in this case, the court held that the right to know of the public can be curtailed only when there is a public interest that is involved in hiding something from the people. So if hiding something from the people will involve an overriding public interest, only then such a thing can be hidden from the people, but otherwise nothing must be hidden from the people. So this is what this case said, that the right to know of the people should be curtailed only in limited circumstances and only if there is an overriding public interest. So this was the gist of the Yashwant Sinha versus the CBI case. So now in the SP Gupta case that we studied and that happened in 1981. So in this particular case, the judge made a very relevant observation which can be included as a part of your answer. The judge made an observation saying that if secrecy were to be observed in the functioning of the government, if all the government procedures and the processes were to be kept hidden, and if secrecy were to be observed in the functioning of the government, then this would promote and encourage oppression, corruption, abuse of authority, misuse of authority, and there wouldn't be any public accountability as well. So this was the observation made by the judge in the Supreme Court in the SP Gupta case. So if there is secrecy in the government functioning, then that would encourage and promote oppression, corruption, abuse of authority, misuse of authority, and diluted public accountability. So this can be made a part of your answer, whether in the introduction or in the conclusion, to say why the right to know is very important. So now we move on, which is related to the criminal law reform. So this topic we have seen even before that the Ministry of Home Affairs has now set up a committee to overhaul the criminal laws in the country that dates back to the British era. So whether it is Indian Penal Code, the CRPC, the Evidence Act, all of that dates back to the colonial era. So therefore, there is a need to reform the criminal laws because the society has changed, the nature of crimes have changed, the complexity of the crimes have changed. So what was criminal before are now no longer criminal, because that time there was the rigid Victorian morality to which the adherence was there, but now that is also changing as the society is transforming. So therefore there is a need felt that the criminal laws in the country need to be overhauled and revamped, and so a committee was set up by the Ministry of Home Affairs. But however, there were several criticisms upon the setting up of this committee, that this committee is not set up in the right way to be able to revamp our criminal laws. So the issues related to this committee can be broadly grouped into two categories. One is that this whole setting up of this committee in a way is disabling participation in the committee, and secondly, it is also disabling deliberation. Now let us analyze each of these categories of issues and see how it is disabling participation and how it is disabling deliberation. And of course, this is a part of your GS2 syllabus. So now we'll see disabling participation. So what happened is this committee, how you're supposed to participate in the committee, how you're supposed to make your recommendations as to what changes are to be incorporated in the criminal law. That is supposed to be made on the website of this committee. So all your recommendations and suggestions can be made through the website of this committee, but we need to understand that only 40% of India's population is active on the internet. So many of us don't even have access to the internet, so therefore they are completely excluded from participating in this exercise and from being able to make suggestions regarding the revamping of criminal laws. Second is, when we talk of this digital divide that is present in the country, this also is more so with respect to women. So women are less likely to have internet access, and thereby their participation in this exercise is going to be that much less. So women participation in this exercise is going to be very much less, because the digital divide is definitely weighs against women, so they don't have much access to internet, particularly when a lot of crimes in the society is also against women. They will be excluded from making any meaningful recommendations and suggestions for revamping the criminal laws. The third issue is related to Kashmir. So since August 2019, the internet services in Kashmir had been suspended, and now only 4G is allowed in just 2 districts in Kashmir. So this restoration of the internet to its original speed is still not complete, and this definitely excludes a large section of the Kashmiri population from making meaningful suggestions for revamping the criminal laws. Next, you come to the life cycle of this particular committee. This committee is supposed to make its recommendations in the period of from June to July to October. So this is a very small time to make the recommendations, and also the life cycle of this committee completely coincides with the COVID-19 pandemic. So the kind of havoc this pandemic has wreaked among the population, many of the people have lost their jobs, they don't have any work to do, they have lost their incomes. So people are having their own problems and they are in a lot of crisis. How is it that we can expect people who are already in crisis to be able to come out on the website and make useful recommendations? So therefore, this way, a lot of our population is already excluded from participation in this exercise. And even if you look at the representation of the committee, this committee lacks a representative character. The representation from the vulnerable sections, from sexual minorities, from religious minorities is not seen in the composition of the committee. So the representation in the committee itself is very poor. So next we talk about the geographic representation in the committee. A lot of the members in this committee belong to just a limited geographic area in the North India, especially Delhi. So this is not even representative of the regions of the country, various regions of the country also it is not representative of. So all of these points show how this particular committee to revamp the criminal laws is actually disabling participation. Now let us see how this committee is also disabling deliberation. So first is to be able to properly deliberate on what needs to be done. we first have to understand what is the mandate of the committee. What is it that the committee is looking for? Only then I'll be able to make my meaningful contribution to it. But however, there is a lot of opacity related to it. The terms of reference of the committee itself is not published. So I do not know what exactly is the mandate of this committee, what is the terms of reference, so that I can make my suggestions for revamping the criminal laws. This is one thing. The second thing is, now we have a separate committee that is being set up for revamping the criminal laws, which is a very huge exercise in itself. But we already have the Law Commission of India. And why is it that in spite of we having the Law Commission of India, a separate ad hoc committee is being created to deliberate upon such a huge issue? The Law Commission of India actually has functioned over a period of so many years now, and it has the procedures established on how to ensure inclusion, on how to ensure more participation, and how to transparently deliberate. On all of these, the Law Commission has over the years has developed established procedures, but this ad hoc committee does not have such an experience. So why is it that on such an important topic as revamping the criminal laws, why are we not using the Law Commission of India's expertise, which has developed and the established procedures on how to get participation from the people and how to ensure inclusion? And why is it that a separate ad hoc committee is being set up for that? So this itself has also limited deliberations. The third thing is, as I earlier pointed out, that the time given for this committee is just July to October. So July to October is too short a time to seek suggestions from the people on revamping the entire criminal law system in India. So if you look at the Malimat committee, which was again set up with a view to revamp the criminal justice system in the country, it took at least 5 times as long as this committee to submit its report. So criminal law reform is not a small thing, and that it can be wound up in a period of 3 to 4 months. It is a huge topic, and it requires a lot of time by the committee to deliberate, to seek suggestions, and to finally make its recommendations. So such a short period of time, it will be very hard for such deliberations and people to come out with meaningful suggestions that can be done to the criminal laws. So these are the various issues that we can say have disabled the deliberation on the revamping of criminal laws. So in the conclusion, what we can say is India is said to be a deliberative democracy. So in a deliberative democracy, what we need is a collective decision making. So in collective decision making, we need all members of the society to transparently participate and deliberate, make an open and a transparent discussion about the topic at hand, and then come out with meaningful suggestions. So if we are a deliberative democracy, and if we strongly believe in collective decision making, we need to have more open and transparent discussions about this issue. So this is what should precisely be our way forward. So now we move on to the next topic, which is the application of drones. So this is under your GS3 paper, where you talk about science and technology. So you may have a question asking for the application of drones, what are drones, and analyze their application in various fields. And this is a question which we had taken up way back in, I think, April or May, and we had discussed it in detail, the application of drones in various sectors of the country. So what this is talking about is the application of drones for the railways. So Railway Protection Force will now be using the Ninjas. Ninjas are the surveillance drones, the unmanned aerial vehicles which will now be deployed by the railways. So what will be the function of these drones? First, they will see to it that the safety of the passengers is enhanced by properly inspecting the tracks and all the properties of the railways, so that safety will be enhanced. Second is, it will also monitor the railway assets. So railways have several assets, for example, the railway land. But on many of these railway lands, there are a lot of encroachments. So these drones will help us in monitoring the assets of the railways and to see if there are any encroachments on the railway assets. These drones can also be used during any disasters or railway accidents for properly mapping the area, and also in the post-disaster operations. So this will be the application of ninjas, that is the drones, for the railways. So this can be given as a current example where the drones are put to use for various in the socio-economic development of the country, in which you can say how they can be very helpful in the railways and other infrastructure development. So now we move on to the next topic. So this is about a case study which you can quote in your answers on a question on education. So we have already read and understood and analyzed various articles on the new education policy and its various features, the importance and the critical analysis of it has been thoroughly covered previously. So this article, New Policy and Old Mindset, was related to the NEP 2020 and its features and how it is helpful and the same things. But however, you can make use of a small case study that this article mentions in your answers. That is a case study of Finland. So Finland is said to have the world's finest educational system. So therefore, you can quote this case study in your answers, particularly the 15 marker questions. You can quote the case study of Finland and say that this is what should form the core of an educational system if we need to make a transition to one of the world's finest educational systems. So some of the features of the Finland's model includes, first is that here the teachers are given a lot of importance in the educational system. So the quality of teachers, the teachers training is given a lot of importance in Finland's educational system. How they are paid good salaries. Then they are also given promotional prospects, which is very important. So the promotional prospects in India are very scarce and scanty. So here the good promotional prospects, good salaries and regular increments are given to the teachers. So therefore here the teachers, they teach not by not chance but out of their choice, because they have good promotional prospects, increments and salaries. And apart from this, the second thing is that the autonomy that the teachers and the educational institutions enjoy. So these schools can come out with their own curriculum development. So they can develop their own curriculum. For that, the teachers and the schools are given more autonomy, and also autonomy regarding how the students need to be assessed. So the assessment of the students, in that respect also, the autonomy that is given to the educational institutions and to the teachers is noteworthy. So these form the two important aspects of the Finland's education system, giving more autonomy to the schools to be able to develop their own assessment system for the students and to develop their own curriculum, and also the centrality of the teachers and the quality of teachers in the educational system. This is ensured by rigorous entry through evaluation and through rigorous tests for the teachers. Only quality teachers enter the system, and once they enter the system, they are also made to retain in the system by good salaries and promotional prospects and regular increments. So this you can quote as a case study in your answers on education. So you can quote the case study of Finland, which is one of the world's finest educational systems. Now we move to the next topic, which is related to DRSE critical analysis. So the departmentally related standing committees, what these committees are, what is their composition, what is their working, that they go through the demand for grants, they go through the bills that are drafted by the ministries, they consider these bills and they make their own recommendations, they go through the reports submitted by these committees. And what are all the importance of the DRSEs? That the parliament is already busy. The parliament meets only in 3 sessions in a period of 3 times in a period of 1 year, and the scarcity of time with the parliament, and also the fact that the issues have become more complex and more technical, which requires more domain experts advice. So, and we saw the various reasons why the DRSEs are important. And at the same time, we saw various issues that are plaguing the DRSEs. So this we have already discussed in detail in the last week's one of the videos. So in today's article, we will be discussing one more important issue that is related to DRSEs. And it's important to write this issue because it is there in the news very recently. So that is the differences that occur between the members in the committee. So this has happened with respect to the Parliamentary Standing Committee on Information Technology. This committee is headed by Shashi Tharoor. So what this committee did was it called Facebook it summoned Facebook that Facebook should appear before the committee. But however, the other members in the particular committee are not in agreement with Shashi Tharoor, and they do not want the Facebook to come and appear before the Standing Committee on Information Technology. So therefore there is a difference of opinion among the members of the committee itself to be able to work effectively and efficiently. So why so this is what you have to write, but let me tell you the background. What has happened is Facebook was supposed to pull down those posts by the politically active people or the politicians which are fueling some hate speech. So apparently a member of the ruling government, the minister of the ruling government posted something on Facebook which is supposed to be communally more communal in nature. It is supposed to fuel some hate speech and stuff like that. So therefore it was supposed to be pulled down by Facebook, but Facebook didn't do this. So there was a Wall Street Journal report that noted that Facebook is not pulling down the posts by a politically active person, though it was actually a hate speech. So the reason cited by Facebook was that why is Facebook not pulling down that post is because that post was by a ruling party member, and pulling down that post could actually hamper the business interests of Facebook in India. So this is why Shashi Tharoor wanted to question Facebook. So he summoned the Facebook to appear before the committee. But the other members of the committee are not in agreement with this, and they do not want the Facebook to come and appear before the committee. So this kind of difference between the members in the committee itself prevents a cohesive discussion among the committee members, and the committee cohesively coming out with some recommendations or suggestions. So this is a very big issue with respect to functioning of the parliamentary standing committees, that there is no agreement between the members. And why has this happened? That even though these committees are based on proportional representation by single transferable vote, which means there are representations from all the parties in the parliament, but the party that has a majority will also have more membership in the committees. So that way the ruling government will have more membership in the committee, and even if the chairman belongs to a different party, the other members together they may that majority may belong to a different party. So because of this, there is always that difference of opinion in the functioning, and that prevents the committee as a whole to make a unanimous decision and a unanimous recommendation. So this can be cited as an example in the flaws in the working of the committee, that there are differences within the members of the committee themselves. So now we move on to the next topic, which is urbanization in a post-COVID scenario. So urbanization comes under your GS1 syllabus, so it is a part of your GS1 paper. So when we talk of the post-COVID scenario, urbanization, thinking about urbanization becomes very important. Why? Because first of all, the population density in the urban areas is also high. So if we look at the current scenario, we see that nearly 63% of the country's GDP is coming from the urban areas. So its contribution to GDP is immense. So therefore it is an engine, the growth engine in the future. So that is why it is very important to focus upon urban areas. And secondly, during the pandemic, if you see the major metro cities, Delhi, Mumbai, Chennai, Bangalore, they are the worst hit. So you can say that these cities, because of their population density, their population which is going to increase in the future, will be hotspots for these pandemics to spread. So because of these reasons, thinking about urbanization in a post-COVID scenario becomes very important. So though in this entire editorial, we do not get any unique points on what we should consider when we think of urbanization in a post-COVID world, just to take the pointers, that is what are all the subheadings that you will have to cover if this question comes in your exam. So though each of these subheadings, there is no unique content that is there in the editorial, but this I have included only to tell these are all the subheadings, these are all the areas that you need to write upon if this question comes in the exam. So the first thing you need to write is on the housing. Why housing? Because there are a lot of informal settlements and slums in the cities. So this is where the epidemic spreads a lot. So therefore, the affordable housing is one area of urbanization that needs to be focused. Next is drinking water and sanitation. So we saw how in these squatter settlements the houses are so crumpled together that and also there is no piped water connection. So washing their hands with the sanitizers, with the hand wash, etc., is a far cry. So therefore, drinking water, piped drinking water, and sanitation is the next important thing that we need to focus. Third is on food and nutrition. We saw how these urban areas are the magnets to which the informal workers from the urban rural areas get attracted. So these workers, they work in various informal sectors in the economy like construction, etc., and therefore food and nutrition for them is very important. We saw how these migrant workers are not entitled to their food because their ration card belongs to their villages. So how they are deprived of food and nutrition, that is very very important issue in the urban areas. So going forward, if the urban areas need to progress, we do need cheap labor in the form of the migrant workers, and we definitely need to give them their entitlements, at least the food and the nutrition. So this is another area to be focused upon. Next is the infrastructure. So when we talk of the urban areas, then infrastructure is something that is central to the urbanization. So this infrastructure again needs to be more modern, as in more environment friendly. So it is said that the use of cement in the construction of buildings and streets and water system sewerage, so that is done. But however, the cement is responsible for nearly 7% of the global carbon emissions. So therefore, we need to be more innovative in this sector, and we need to reduce the use of cement in building our infrastructure. So we need to make a transition towards green building materials. So we also need to come out with green building codes, and we also need to ensure the compliance with the green building codes. So this one is very important. As we said, cement contributes to 7% of the global carbon emissions. So that is why it is important to move and transition towards the green building codes and ensure their compliance. The last thing is the power. So power again is very important. When everything is there above, then the next question comes is, how are we going to power all these? So we know how fossil fuels have been responsible for 2/3 of the global ambient air pollution deaths. So therefore, we need to move away from fossil fuels towards more renewable sources of energy. So therefore, more green energy, more renewable sources of energy, that is very important in the coming future, in the coming urban areas in the future. So we need to focus towards sustainable and universal energy access. So this is regarding power. So these are the 5 important areas that you will have to cover in your answers if the question comes on what should be the nature of urbanization in the post-COVID world. So now on to the next topic, which is related to the environmental issues. So this was just a report by the Center for Science and Environment. So the Center for Science and Environment made a study of the coal blocks that were recently auctioned by the center. So out of the 49 blocks that were created for coal mining since 2015, the 49 coal blocks were cleared for coal mining. Out of this, 9 of the blocks were in the no-go areas. These no-go areas, according to the Ministry of Environment and Forest and Climate Change, are those areas that have very dense forest cover, and therefore they are not available for coal mining. But however, in 2015, 9 out of the 49 areas that were cleared for coal mining were in these no-go forest areas that had very dense forest covers. And again in 2020, so in 2020 also, of the 41 coal blocks that were put for auction, 21 feature in this no-go list of forest areas. So this was the study that is done by the Center for Science and Environment. So this again shows the loopholes in our policies, where we are even giving preference to development over sustainable growth, over sustainable development, and we are allowing the mining of coal even in these no-go areas which have very dense canopy forests. So this can be used as an example to counter argue that we are focusing more on growth and we need to move towards sustainable development. So today's question related to current affairs for prelims is Spice Plus. It was in news recently. So what is this related to? And yesterday, as many of you have rightly pointed out, that Death Valley National Park in California has recorded the highest, warmest air temperature. So that is why it was in news. These were the other articles that was not really important from your exam point of view. So, and also tomorrow is Tej, which is a festival celebrated in North India. So because of that, I may not be able to come out with a video tomorrow, but I'll try my best to do so, and I'll try my best to upload the video tomorrow. But if it is not possible, then expect a video on Saturday. And in the worst case, if I really get busy, then on Monday I'll be covering Thursday, Friday, Saturday. All the 3 days will be covered on Monday. Thank you.